Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I'm Esther Weinberg, and I've been working with massive brands like Netflix, Disney, Sony, Nike, Adobe, Microsoft. I think we've worked with every major media brand on the planet and basically work with them on something that's probably very near and dear to your heart. Three things. How do you grow and scale to be the best and most effective at what you do? How do you actually keep and retain the best people? And how do you actually very mindful about the technology that you add and the impact on people so they don't feel irrelevant? And so I've been doing that for a good part of my life. I was both an interim CEO many, many years ago. Tim, we didn't talk about that. I was an interim CEO, and I've also been an executive inside of big companies like actually at Disney. My last corporate job like that was actually the head of all communications for one of Disney's major divisions. So, and I'm from Brooklyn, New York, married with 2 dogs. So there you go.
I love it. Yeah. And the dogs, that's it. Yeah, you and I met actually through Promax initially.
That's right.
We were at the same event, but in 2 different rooms. You were talking to the C-suites of the networks and talking to them about transition and growth. And at that time, I think you were doing some leadership development with some of the key players. And I was next door teaching how to bulletproof your profits. So I know that we had some initial interface there. But more recently, just recognizing what's going on in this industry. And when I was throwing a small conference, we were reintroduced. And I was able to process you and talk about what the opportunities are and kind of how to think through things. So it's been great talking to you and picking your brain about many of these big things that people are facing.
Yeah, it's been, I have to say that the industry is going through, it's interesting because you all know what the industry is going through, but I think we have to contextualize it. Every business is a season. So and the economic landscape that we find ourselves in, and it's analogous to the seasons that we go through. There's fall, there's winter, there's spring, there's summer. In fall, you reap the unwinding of life. In winter, which is what we're in now, we slow down. You may feel like your feet are in mud. There's regeneration, and you create space for new things to emerge. In spring, there's a creation of something new. There's exciting high growth. You could do nothing and sleep, and you'd earn a lot of money in the spring. And the summer is a hot time. You're awakening, you're testing things. So the winter is really when I find a lot of executives and CEOs of businesses feel like they're sloshing through the mud, which you may feel also, but it's actually this space and time that if you can succeed now, you can succeed anytime, because actually more businesses were born in times of pessimism and winter than they were actually born in any other of the seasons. And I'm not talking about like, oh, was Pepsi born in December? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the seasonal stage that a business is actually in. So I think that's important to remember.
Yeah, so like 2001, a lot of things were popping up because the technology was changing. Desktop revolution, we called them boutique agencies then, but we met like 120 people. And then again, like it was a 2006 to 2008 transition, another crisis, and another kind of boom happened. And so you can definitely see where probably out of desperation or need, people are stepping into business ownership or owning their own job because they might have lost a position or recognized there's an opportunity with a transition of technology or style or approach. And this is their moment to start living out this is their springboard to jump into whatever the next season is. And,
that's right.
If you're at the low, you're going to have a nice upswing. So there's opportunity for growth immediately.
Yeah, it's a great way to say it, because I do think that we're going through so much change. I mean, we should talk about all that, but I do think that we're on the precipice of actually something exciting rather than something depressing.
Well, it's because we're basically talking about, there's 2 things I want to kind of address today. One is the obvious change, right? But I want to kind of get into the detail of what it means to build a leadership team for the change.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're starting a company right now, you have a blessing of not needing to pivot and determine which team members are best suited for what comes next and which ones might not be. But if you've been in business for 10 to 20 years,
right,
this might be a very difficult change because you have invested in individuals, you have some positive cash flow, your clients are holding back the dam as much as possible to kind of keep and retain you.
Right.
But that's where this difficulty really is, right? The people in that later or more mature business stages.
Well, it's interesting because I would say that when you're at this inflection point of what you're talking about in business right now, I think we have to remember a few things. I think you have to go back to some things and not be asleep at the switch. So what I mean by that is what I often find with leaders and teams at this stage is there's a few things that practically are missed. So one is that people actually don't know where they're fully headed as an organization. They lose sight of it, especially they lose sight of it if things are shifting so much in the marketplace. It's very difficult for people to actually hold on to what's happening now. Now, we know this theoretically, that leaders supposed to set a vision, and I would even say to have a purpose for people of like, why the hell are we doing what we're doing? Because unless you have a why, when the context is missing, it's very difficult for people to show up in hard times. It's easy when things are going well because it's like, hey, we're amazing, we're making money, everyone's succeeding, it's great. But when things are more difficult, it's very difficult to do that. That's number one. The second thing that teams don't do, which they need to do, is executive teams, leadership teams, when they come together, is one is if they have that North Star. Second thing is to discuss like, what are we committed to as a team in order to achieve that? I call it a team commitment. That's vital to have. It's vital to have because it's the glue that keeps you together. And also leadership teams, people leave. They need to, then when new team members come back and they're onboarded, how are you onboarding them? So like, hey, Tim, how are you? Come join the group. You know, that's great. Okay, so you have a specialty in X, you keep doing what you're doing. You have a specialty in metrics. We'll let you keep talking. It's not the way it works because you have to remember something. When you're on an executive team, like one of the biggest mistakes I see is I see executive teams, like when they meet, they're talking about what is happening today. It's not why an executive team should be meeting. You're meeting because you're anticipating what's happening in the future. If you are not anticipating, if you're not asking yourself, what business am I in? What business do I need to be in? What business do I need to be in the future? You're already failing 100%. You're already not succeeding. So as a team, you have to have a commitment for what we're actually going to achieve in the future together that aligns with the vision. Then the third thing, which is very non-sexy, is you have to talk about all the blocking and tackling. How are we going to relate, communicate, debate with each other in order to be able to achieve that? I just had a team that I was working with a couple of months ago, and they were going through this exact same thing. And we're creating commitments about they did, you know, beautifully, theoretically, right? When you sit down, you can always pontificate things like, oh, you know, when there's opinions that's dissenting, we are going to debate it until we're just going to we're just going to debate it for 30 minutes. They even put time frames on it to 30 minutes, and then we're going to come to a consensus. We're going to move on. Well, a few months later, they're bottlenecked now. They can't make decisions. They don't debate. And so I went back to the leader, and we went back to the team and revisited the commitments and said, okay, well, what are we not doing? So it's not about a person, but it's about what we're committed to and what our agreements are. So, hey, you know, we said we're dissenting, but we're not actually dissenting. What's happening is when we disagree with each other, we're back channeling. We're not doing it in the room. And it takes so much time, effort, and energy. And so what do we need to recommit to? So now they're actually, first of all, what they've noticed in the last 60 days is their effectiveness to get things done are so much faster because they're not back channeling. And their actually communication and trust is accelerating because now it's happening in the room. It's not happening outside the room.
And when you say team, you quite literally mean people inside a company, on a board, sometimes a C-suite of a large enough company, but you can also mean key employees. If you're a smaller business, you might have key employees, maybe even some permalancer staff or permalancers that you work with frequently. And even sometimes clients can be part of that like core leadership group within your company if you're processing something like change. So if you have a close relationship with somebody you trust their perspective, you can bring them into that conversation and ask them. That can be part of that leadership leadership team as well. Yeah,
very much. You know, teams mean very different things today. And by the way, when I saw the comment about back channeling, when I say back channeling, what I mean is that, you know, when you're in a room and you're solving problems together and you're vulnerably doing it, you're talking about the things that are most difficult. You know, you're talking about, like one team that I was working with, two of the executives in the room, really, they're oil and water and disagreeing. And so how can they put their differences aside to actually be able to solution in the room? And what I mean by back channeling is I'm sure you've been a part of this. You agree to things in the room, no matter what it is. And then you leave and you go, I really wasn't on board with that. And so then you start talking to other people about how you weren't on board with it. Or if Tim and I are on the same team, actually, I don't really trust him. So I'm not going to go directly to him to get things done. I'm going to go around him. I had this conversation with a woman yesterday. She said to me, I hate my executive who I report to. I hate her. I hate her. And I was like, I had never heard the word hate like that in a long time. She said, I hate her. And I said, well, why do you hate her? And she said, well, she doesn't know how to lead. And she uses language like, I hate this, so we're not going to do it. So first of all, I'm not going to talk about how terrible that actually is to do. But what I said to her was, well, what are your boundaries? How are you teaching your leader to communicate with you? What are the agreements you had as a team in order to discuss how you're going to communicate together in those rooms when someone is off color or disrespectful? Because she felt it was really disrespectful. And she goes, well, we really didn't talk about it. So I said, okay, so basically you have an opinion. So you have rules of a game that you decide how you want her to play, but you haven't actually asked her if she wants to play by these rules. And this
happens all the time, doesn't it? My gosh, yeah.
Yeah. So she's like, well, these are basic rules of common decency. And I said, according to who? And also, you don't know what else is true. Turns out the executive, in a former job, she actually had to lead a crew of production people, and the style to which she had to lead was very different than what she's being asked to lead now that she's more folded into a corporate role. And so her language, her tone, her way of being, like she could be mean and nasty with production people. I mean, you shouldn't be nasty with anybody, but she can be mean and nasty and grueling with them and kind of curt, but you can't do that. First of all, you shouldn't do that all the time. And secondly, there's no way she's going to get away with that here.
Yeah.
So, but if no one ever gave you feedback about your leadership style, and then you're in this environment and no one told her about how the rules of the game go here, how does she know what game she's even playing?
I always appreciate when you give feedback because they'll just say like you have an expectation or you're teaching grace. So if you're in a leadership position, even if you have an executive that's a boss that's basically supposed to be giving you direction, you need to take some moment before you just respond to something in a negative way to recognize who that person really is and what feedback they might need to be proactive and built up, because they're also a human that has to learn and grow in that situation. I always appreciate that you have that like grace perspective when it comes to sharing and building up one another.
Well, if I may add one other thing, I think that one of the most vital things when we talk about feedback, because I think feedback is a word that's very buzzy, right? And I can't stand when people say feedback is a gift. Feedback is only a gift if you like the person who it's coming from. Otherwise, it is not a gift. If you don't like the person who it's coming from, it's not really a gift. You don't like what they're saying. You may not even listen to them. So what I say I actually had this conversation with a group of CEOs the other week, is that you have to remember that in feedback, you have to take care of you first before you take care of the other person in front of you. And it's very vital to do that, especially if if you're in a position of power, because no matter what comes out of your mouth, it's going to be a power dynamic. You will, no matter what, when you start talking, it's going to be a power dynamic that's happening. So what I say to anyone before they go and enter any kind of conversation that may be a little squirrely, I have a few for them, that you answer what I affectionately call my 5 A's, the 5 A questions. And 5 A's stand for aware, accurate, acquire, accountability, and action. So what I mean by that is, aware is, what feelings am I aware of? What feelings am I aware of? And the reason why I say that is because feelings may not be facts, but they're, what my wife says always is, they're road signs to what's most important to you. And so all of us have feelings. And I hate to say it, we talk about don't be emotional, but we're all emotional human beings. So you need to process that before you get in front of somebody else. Secondly is, what is the truth? Is it accurate or your own personal interpretation? Just because I feel something, it may not be third-party verifiable truth, but it's my truth because it's how I feel about it. I may
Right.
think that you're bullying people, but is that really, or I may think that your sales targets, you said as doing new business development that you're going to hit certain sales targets and they didn't. Now that is actually a fact, because you can, if those were written down, you can go against that. That is a third party verifiable fact. But me thinking that actually you didn't speak so well to someone as you were doing a sales conversation with them, that is an interpretation.
Yeah.
The third thing is acquire. What learning am I meant to acquire by being in this situation? Not what I'm meant to learn about you, Tim, or somebody else, but what I'm learning about myself. And then fourth is accountability. What is my part? I often find that there's maybe even like 1% that's my part, mostly everything. I mean like at least. And then action is what proactive action can you take? And it may be having the conversation. Honestly, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's, you may need more information. You may need to talk to a few more people before you need to sit in front of one specific individual and have that conversation. So anyway, it's a tool
Yeah.
that I recommend
I
using.
love it. The 5 A's. There's like a ancient saying, don't talk about the speck in someone else's eye until you're taking care of the plank in your own eye. Like, make sure you're aware of your biggest faults before you just go pick on someone else's little new. But I
That's
have been, consulting is interesting because you are often the truth teller. And there are seasons that owners go through that they're willing to accept some truth to a limit. And then there's a limit they're uncomfortable and don't want to hear it anymore. So have to be recognize that. And sometimes that's a moment that we take a break. But even the back channeling, I've been in rooms I've been asked to lead a room of leadership. And in the room, everyone agrees to it. But there's one person that feels very uncomfortable with that change. They start back channeling. And before you know it, Tim isn't their consultant anymore. They determined it was this third party person who was just reflecting back what they were saying. I wasn't determining it myself, but they didn't, that back channeling can be very destructive. And as a leader, especially executive, you need to recognize, wait a second, am I responding to key employees because I'm afraid I might lose them? And I like the status quo, or I'm afraid to lose the status quo. Or do you have to recognize, like, this key employee is not on board with the why and the trust that we made? I need to be very aware and start getting rid of that wrong person, right? Like, this is a moment where you start recognizing my team's not together. And there are people I love and respect, but they're just not going to make it through this transition. And they start back channeling, creating chaos, hurting other things, slowing things down. And that's a pretty good sign of, like, this might be a moment of some harder decisions.
right. Well, I find that sometimes, it's an interesting thing, because I think especially whether you're leading a division or you're a CEO of an organization, I think you have to determine first, before you even say to yourself, wow, that my team really is kind of fractured, which may be true. But I think it's very important for you to do some truth telling with yourself. Because I find sometimes that the thinking that needs to go into some of the planning or future thinking as a CEO or as a CMO or as a head of a division, that it's not done to the degree that it needs to be done, because you've got so much that's going on, especially these days. You've got, like what I talked about, even when I introduced myself, you're trying to grow and scale, trying to figure out what that looks like and means today. You need a crystal ball for some of that. Trying to keep your best people without compromising it. And for some of you, it may be you're keeping the best people, or you may have, or someone's asking you to fire a bunch of people, which is also unfortunately a reality today, depending on how big of the organization you're in. And third thing is you're dealing with technology that you're adapting, and you want to make sure that your people are adopting. And so I find that you're in this unenviable position that could feel isolating, because who are you going to talk to? You can't necessarily talk to your team about it because you're supposed to be leading it. So you kind of need all the answers in a way. I mean, yes and no. We know that's
I almost feel like people want you to have like a baked in solution while you're just like drinking from a fire hose. Like, it's way too much, and you're supposed to have all the solutions, and you have nowhere to go with that.
No, I think it's very difficult. And also I would say that while people are looking at you, it's also incumbent upon you to be able to pause and think. And that's why you and I talked about this earlier. That's why I created something called the Growth Accelerator. It's an initiative to take a CMO, a head of a division, even a CEO, to be able to sit down for 2 days and to really mine what is your thinking, all from the beginning of where the industry is going, all the way charting through where your company is growing, where your team is growing, new stakeholders, your resources that you need, how you're developing your people, all to your own role and how it's developing. And so I think that if you don't do that level of thinking, you're really going to lose. That's why we created the Growth Accelerator, because we've been doing it with people, and in like 2 days, you walk out with a blueprint that then you can go have those conversations with your leadership team and with your finance people to budget plan, and you can do all of that. Otherwise, I think it's very, very difficult to do that on your own.
Well, what we were saying was we were almost joking, like a lot of people know they have to change, so they change just for the sake of change, and they're mistaking a bunch of changes with actual innovation. And some of the changes they might be doing are completely harmful, taking the team off rails, or just creating more and more chaos because they don't know what innovation looks like. So they just randomly are choosing things without having a clear roadmap for it.
That's, the story that I was telling Tim was that there was a chief HR officer I was talking to the other day, and we were talking about the fact that there is systemic issues happening inside their company. And I've heard this from other people inside the organization, that the CEO is determined. He's very creative, highly innovative. And so he constantly is changing his mind. He's constantly changing his mind because he wants the organization to be nimble and flexible and adjusting, and he's expanding. He's responding to market changes. And so what's happening is that it's causing people to be very confused. And then people are double doing work because they think that no one's doing a project, but actually 2 people are doing projects. And so we were talking about, couldn't there be a line item in their income statement and their balance sheet and their cash flow statement of what it looks like to double do the work? And also, what's all this stopping and starting, how it's impacting the business? And so it's interesting because she was saying to me that the CEO considers it that he's being innovative. And I said, that's not innovation. That is, and in fact, and one of the reasons she was like, we were talking about doing the Growth Accelerator, because she's like, if he could just have an anchor, a place, a repository to put all of his thinking, then he could really map it out. Because when we do the Growth Accelerator, we do it in such a way, it's almost like storyboarding, especially for visual people love it, because you could see, oh my God, I can connect the dots where before I didn't. And also where all the money is bleeding to. Because she said to me, he just wants to be better than all of our competition. I said, he's believing his own bullshit. You're not going to get there by doing what's happening right now.
It's the funny thing is too, people in a leadership role, when they feel inadequate, they feel like they're, a little bit afraid of what's coming. What they use is their power, and they say, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to make you do something just to prove I'm your boss. And so, and they know this is totally like, subconscious almost at what they're doing, but they keep acting out this authoritative position, even though it's completely bonkers. No one agrees with it. There's no real sound idea of where they're going to go, but they basically say like, well, I'm the boss and this is what I'm thinking, so we better go through with it. As a knowledgeable outsider, sometimes we can just like be a sounding board for a moment before everybody else has to be subjected to it. We can absorb some of that and parse it, maybe find the good things that are relevant, that are attached to the why, and kindly say, let's just put that stuff off for later. I don't know about you. Sometimes I find if you say no directly, people don't want to respond. Like, we just put that later. We prioritize it into later priorities. And then you can keep up with the schedule or the transition you're trying to get through.
Well, it's interesting. You're reminding me of, there was an agency that I worked with, and they're global and they're really growing very quickly. And what we realized very quickly too is that the CEO is an amazing visionary, absolutely an amazing visionary, a horrible CEO, amazing visionary. He he actually never formed an executive team. He's never formed one in his life. He doesn't know what to do with that. He doesn't really know how to leverage people fully. He doesn't really fully know how to leverage his CFO. And so what we did was we created a new role for him. It's like, well, let's transition him out. First of all, he's so valuable. He can open this company in any market. any market, even if there's 2 people in that market, he could open that market and make money like there's nothing. He's amazing.
Yeah.
So we created a new role for him so that he could actually be great at being a visionary, and then hire a CEO who can really do the blocking and tackling that's required on a daily basis. And as a result of that, the revenue from the company well, first of all, they were doing well, but it accelerated beyond what their even projections were, because they had the visionary. Well, he wasn't the sales department, but he was like a sales department in one human being. And he was a spokesperson globally. And then the CEO could do what the CEO needed to do, transform the organization.
Oh, yeah, that ambassador role. Sometimes as entrepreneurs, you have to realize you're addicted to solving the problem. So you make your own problems to solve, and that could slow down the business or create chaos. So that ambassador role is ones that say like, hey, go solve problems away from our day-to-day operations, put someone else in leadership, and allow that pivot to take place. And often the leader might not have a vision of what's coming up in the future. Letting go of that wheel is very, very difficult, though. Like handing it off to somebody else, thinking that they can, businesses often feel like our babies. Like if I give it to you, my personal cash flow is affected, or my legacy might be affected. There's other things that people hold on to. Okay, I want to open this up to people's questions. It is it's about 11:30 here this time, so 2:30 I'm going to say Pacific. You have a couple more minutes, right? If we open up to questions.
Let's answer. I'm here to stay to answer everybody's questions, so I'm here.
Yeah, I'm going to start off with a question because this is what I'm curious about. Not only do our businesses going through transition, but our clients are going through transition. I'm wondering if I was running a service-based business.
Yeah.
And I had, let's say, like a network as one of my clients, and I recognize that leadership is shifting and changing. Right. But I want to maintain my role for that network, for the corporation. Is there anything I could do to come alongside that change? Not to hedge my bet, but just to recognize and take over responsibility, lean into something, ask certain questions. Is there anything practical I could do to help with that?
Yeah, I think that, well, first of all, I think it goes back to a premise that, we're all in businesses. So I want to be clear. We're here to make money. I'm not talking about running a nonprofit. So I think we have to be clear that we need to fall in love with our clients, not fall in love with our product. So we have to detach ourselves from falling in love with the service. Like, my service is so fabulous, I'm going to offer it to you, but falling in love with our client and what do they actually need right here, right now. Sometimes I find people just need a sounding board. And it's not that, and I find that sometimes we're, that especially if you're an entrepreneur, you have a bias to action. That's why you're an entrepreneur. And so right. You have to remember that sometimes I find today that folks, first of all, they need more sounding boards. Number 2 is they're being asked to do things that many people have never been asked before. For example, there was a president of content at a division, and she said to me, I need to lay off 20% of my workforce. I've never had to do that in my entire life. So I said to her, well, what is your HR team? How is your HR team helping you? She goes, they're not. She said, they sent me an email with some talking points.
Oh, man.
That's not the kind of person I am. I said, of course you're not. You're a human being with human dignity. That's not the kind of person you are. You have empathy. And so in that moment, now, of course, this is what I do for a living, but if it was you in that role with this person, it could be that you could say to this person, I've known a few people that have gone through that. Let me connect you with them because I think they could really be great sounding boards. So sometimes it's that you may provide being the connector. That's the service that you need to step into and provide to them in ways that you have never been able to connect people before. And that it's not you have to take yourself out of the equation. What do they need right now? What are their needs? Once again, not falling in love with your service, but you're falling in love with your client. And how do you actually service what their need is? You don't have to step in with this woman and say, hey, I know how to lay people off. It could be that you do, but it could be, hey, I know people that have had to do this in similar businesses, similar sizes, similarly, we're in the dark. Let me connect you.
Yeah, get some other people's perspective.
Yeah, and if you did that, you would be a hero. You'd be a hero.
Because it's almost like I can hear you saying there's an opportunity to mature your relationship with somebody, not just be a vendor or a taker or trying to get the basic things done, which you should keep on doing as well. But
Look,
to have a listening ear is really important in these relationships.
I'll tell you a very funny story that I heard this a few days ago that I think punctuates this story, but it's probably a little crazy. So Tony Hsieh, if anyone knows who Tony Hsieh was the CEO of Zappos, the shoe company. He died several years ago, very, very young. But Tony Hsieh was an amazing visionary. So anyway, Zappos promises insane customer care. Okay. So Tony Hsieh was at a party in Los Angeles, and people decide at this party, there's not a lot of people there, but they decide what they're going to do. They're going to take it to this venue. They're going to take it to a hotel in Santa Monica, for those of you that know LA. So anyway, they go, and this woman does not know who Tony Hsieh is. So I want to be clear about this. So anyway, they go to the hotel, they start in the room, and the woman has had way too much to drink. So she's kind of drunk, and she's like, I want a pizza. All I want a pizza. So, and they're like, all right, well, get yourself pizza. She goes, no, I'm going to call Zappos. And I know this sounds insane. So she calls her rep at Zappos. Now, this is a woman who just shops for shoes at Zappos. They're not a client. She calls Zappos, and Tony Hsieh, you can imagine, he's the CEO of the company. He's like promising.
He's like crossing his fingers. This better work.
Yeah, he's standing on the side, and he's like, holy shit, like what's going to happen now? And thank God she doesn't know who he is. Anyway, so she's like, she gets on the phone with this woman. I want pizza. And she's like, the woman on the other phone, you could hear both conversations. She's like, ma'am, she had her speakerphone. Ma'am, you called Zappos. Yeah. Yeah. You said you're the best at doing whatever it takes to make me happy. I want a pizza. So the woman pauses and she says, you're right, ma'am. We are Zappos, and we do promise excellent customer service. All right, so what kind of pizza you want? And so I was like, I want pepperoni pizza. And so the woman on the other phone at Zappos said, well, give me your address and how many you want. I want pepperoni pizzas, right? Pepperoni pizzas. And the woman from Zappos said, if you don't get it in 30 minutes, it's on me. And in 30 minutes, the pizzas were delivered.
Wow, that's awesome. I love it.
So
I love it when the promise lives up to its, and especially if Tony's in the room, can you imagine he's like, give that person a raise or whatever. He's texting somebody right now, telling them.
So it's such a great example. I know it's a little crazy, right? But like, who's ordering like this drunk woman with the pizza? But yes, delivering happiness. Exactly. If you've never read that book, it's amazing. And I would just say that's what all of our jobs are now, because we're living in a time right now where there is, I'm all about human dignity. How do you bring human dignity more to the workplace? And so if you can do that with your client to really see where their pain is and what their needs are, what they really are, I think you'll have a customer for life.
I love it. Does anyone else have a question or a transition yeah, go ahead, Doug.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Tim. Hi, Esther. How are you? Very nice to meet you. I was thinking about something. I coach leaders, and I think a lot of what you're talking about resonates. But I would just ask you, a little earlier, you talked about being self-aware, but how do I feel about approaching feedback? And I think that that's important because it's very difficult to gauge how what you say is going to be perceived. People, are frightened of their manager approaching their desk the moment that manager steps out of their office. They're like, oh no, what did I do now? Generally.
That's right.
So I've always thought about a leader having various types of power, and the kind that I think you want is referent power. In other words, they admire you so much, and they feel this has been studied, and I could at some point send Tim a link to this study. It's about 50 or 60 years old. That referent power, as opposed to transactional or positional power, is more meaningful because basically you're gaining authority through trust and empathy, as opposed to simply, well, you've got this title in front of you, therefore you have control of me. And so, or transactional, I hold back the raise or the perk until you do X. I hold your fate in my hands. I was wondering what your thought was about that, the types of different types of power and leadership.
I feel like I read that in a parenting book too. Similar issues in parenting book too, right? Yeah.
Yes, it's often the case.
Yeah.
I think that I agree with you. Look, I think that there's I think not to quote Brené Brown, but she talks a lot about power with versus power over. And it comes down to, am I going to sit alongside with you, or am I going to dictate to you of what's going to be done? I mean, it's kind of like, it's because remember, if I tell, let's just be practical. If I tell you what to do, well, first of all, it's very hierarchical, but if I tell you what to do, you don't own it. It's my thing. It's not your thing. And so just from a practicality standpoint, it's not really going to be that effective. But I think that it's how can I come alongside my people rather than dominating them, I think is what we're talking about. And that's where I think the responsibility is, like we were talking about earlier when we were talking about emotions, right? Is for us to know what those are. Look, I remember there was a woman who, a client of mine, she went to work for a woman that was one of the most leading content providers in the animation space. And she went to work for her and she thought, my God, I hit the jackpot. This is like my dream job. I'm going to work for someone who's going to mentor me and build me and develop me and all of it. And she gets into the job and she finds, Doug, you would probably understand and know this well. She gets into the job and that's not what she has. The woman who she reports to can't make a decision. She vacillates on her decisions. And then also she will say one thing in one moment and then later say something else that'll completely derail everything. So she was the woman I was working with was asked to actually come up with a reorganization plan for the team, and she was asked to do it with a guy who's at her level, like her collaborator, right? And so what does she do? Because she's a high performer and the guy she's working with is also someone who can't make a decision. So she all of a sudden is now dominating him, which is not. So it's bad power dynamics any which way you look at it. But when she sat with the question of what feelings I'm aware of, normal things came up. I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I feel disappointed, the normal stuff. But what she really got was she was heartbroken. And there's a world of difference between heartbreak and anger. But once she got that, she could more easily know about what power, positional power that she was playing in. And she could actually now collaborate with the guy that couldn't make a decision in a much more effective way, as well as with her boss.
The awareness creates immediate empathy, doesn't it? You see yourself in that situation.
Well, it also, the thing is that, I don't know about you, but when I went to school, first of all, I wasn't taught emotions. Number one, I wasn't taught emotions. No. And I don't care what you say, like the emotions don't belong in the workplace. Sorry, if you have a heartbeat, they do. So number one is that I was never taught emotions. And number two, as my wife says, she's way smarter than me at times. She says that we're taught in periods and not in question marks.
I love it. That's so true.
So if constantly we know the answer, we have to know the answer, we're not asking the questions, because the person with the most power, if you want to say it that way in quotation marks, but that's not really the right word, is the person that asks the questions. Because that's really what leadership is all about, more than anything else. How can you act decisively? How do you actually know what questions to ask?
Yeah, humility is part of it.
Absolutely.
Did anybody else want a question? Because I have another one.
Doug, that was a great question. Thank you for asking it. It was a great one.
Thank you. I appreciate that. If anybody's ever interested, there's a great book by Dr. Edgar Schein called Humble Leadership. He talks all about humility, and that it's the gentle art of asking, not telling, is the subtitle. And he's a wonderful writer and a very learned man. He sadly passed away last year. But anything by Edgar Schein and his son Peter is a great help in this type of leadership.
Yeah,
and I think you're right.
Throw that in the chat there, Doug. Throw that book or the name of it.
Okay, I will.
Yeah. Phil wants to read it. Phil is the best student we have. He'll read everything we can possibly put out there. Okay, so if no one else has a question, just to wrap it up, because I want to make this really practical, because I could see myself doing it sometime. I'm sure all of us feel this way, but there is a moment where we are very afraid to make some of these bigger change decisions. And if I, if I was working with you and I was struggling with a change, even though I could see it, it's in black and white, all the finances are there, right? Because it's a prove it financially, prove it leadership wise, directionally, it's the wrong direction, all that kind of stuff. But I still hesitate to make that decision. What can I do for myself to recognize that it's coming? And then where do I start processing so I get over it? My personal sense is that I'm afraid of the future if I make this change. But that's an irrational thought, because the future is inevitable and you don't know it anyway. But we often kind of like stick with the current status quo because we think it's a better way to deal with the future. And so when faced with a change, we just hate the idea of this unknown. But I'm curious, how do I face it? How do I recognize it? And then what are the first steps I could do to get past that so that I can start being smart in leadership and making changes I need to?
Okay. So I'll say it this way. So what you're really talking about is, how do I produce better results, no matter what the conditions and circumstances are that's in front of me, right? How do I have access to new actions to lead to new results? And I can do it in a way that has me feel confident and assured doing it. And even if I'm afraid, I can still take, because courage, I want to be clear, courage is not in the absence of fear. Courage has fear built into it. I'm courageous.
Exactly. That's what you need. Courage. That's what courage is about, facing the fear. Yeah.
So let me just share. I want to share two distinctions that I think is vital for people to know. And this is very practical. And the distinctions is an assessment and an assertion. So one is an assertion, just to be clear, an assertion is a third-party verifiable fact. So for example, if we're all together in a room and I say it's 73 degrees, you can turn to the thermostat and say, it's 73 degrees, it's verifiable. It's least generative. I mean, 73 degrees doesn't generate anything, it's 73 degrees. And you can ask for evidence, and it's actually past or present based. And it's not impacted by our moods or emotions at all. 73 degrees doesn't really do anything. Now, an assessment is all my opinions and judgments. It's all, and it's personal, and they're extremely generative. Because if I say it's cold in here, I may put on a sweater. I may say, hey, Tim, isn't it cold in here? We should raise that thermostat, right? So it generates something. And you can assess anything without any limits. And an assessment belongs to the person assessing. And it's future oriented, and it actually absolutely influences our future action. And it's highly connected to our moods or emotions. So when I feel afraid, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, what's an assessment and what's an assertion about what I'm feeling right now? Nice. Because what is actual third-party verifiable evidence of what I'm feeling right now? Now I'm afraid. There's truth to the fact that I feel afraid. But what is that fear based on? Well, I'm afraid that I'm going to lose market share. Well, okay. All right. Well, what else? Well, I'm afraid that I'm going to lose great people. Okay, I got it. Well, what is true? Is that an assessment? Actually, yeah, it is my assessment. It is a judgment. But what else could be true here? Well, what else could be true here is that I actually haven't really experimented with any new products or services or getting to know my clients a little bit deeper than I have been. And what value does it have for you to continue to feel that fear? Like what other assessment can you actually jump into that would not jump, but what other assessment can you generate that would actually create and produce the result that you want? Well, another assessment I can make is that actually this is just a blip. What I need to do is I need to go back and talk to my CFO and look at our finances and actually talk to my marketing people and see what things we can experiment with in order to produce a new result. And so then what do I need to stop and start doing? Well, I can actually start generating and experimenting with this new product. And actually, let's create some metrics in place for the next 3 months, see if it's actually going to work. So by asking yourself, is it an assessment or an assertion? Then based on that, you can actually stand in what's the impact if you continue to see it from your assessment. And then if you go back to your original intention, well, hey, I want to create the most successful company that actually generates and transforms people's lives and engages audiences in ways they never did before. Well, okay, if you're going to do that, then what new assessment do you want to believe for yourself that will have you generate a new result? So it really comes down to knowing those distinctions, asking those questions. And I think that in itself, just by generating that, also from neuroscience, what it'll do is it will change your state. Because when I am in a mood of resignation, I can't do anything. I don't know about you. If I get up in the morning and I'm like, the world sucks and I suck, I can't generate anything. But if I'm like, you know what? There's possibility. I'm in it. Let's do it. Let's go. There's actual evidence, even by Amy Cuddy, who did this wonderful Harvard study about like power poses, which people think are silly, but there's actually something to it, that when you get into state and you ask yourself these questions, you can actually move out of fear. And then you can see all of a sudden you're a genius. All of a sudden it's like, well, here's 3 new ideas that I never thought of before.
Yeah.
So,
And you can literally program yourself into that. You could say, if you believe by drinking green juice that you can have more action, if you're putting certain shoes on or wearing a certain hat, well, then you put that by your bedside, you wake up in the morning, you put that thing on, and you're already thinking that way, program yourself that way, and not let the doubt come in. Like you can literally trigger yourself into good action and good results.
well, I'll say this: when people get afraid, what they do is they either retreat. Like, so I get afraid, I retreat, or I make myself smaller, or I make my products and services smaller, or I get busy. But what you need to do is you need to examine the narratives, the stories that you're telling yourself that's producing the state that you're in. So this way, if you shift that, because it's a belief mechanism, if you shift that, then all of a sudden you will see new actions that you have never seen before that will lead to new results.
Yeah, brilliant. And that's what we're looking for, especially in this time of assessment, growth, to get to or transitions, all these things that feel a little wishy-washy and not perfect, to get to some hard facts, some clear actions, and take them, measure the results of them, and make a new decision if you have to, or keep on going on the same path. But don't guess at something and then try something, not assess if you've accomplished the goal or not, and then keep on making a new change or hold back or just stick with your fear. All those things are what's going to knock you off. I think they're closing down behind me. The lights just turned off, right?
Before we go, you have to remember something, that oftentimes what measures gets managed. I heard that this a few days ago, that what measured gets managed. And if we're not measuring, then how can we actually know the effectiveness of what we're doing, including how many times we're going to be in fear and how quickly we get out of it too.
Yeah. Which is often why when I implement something, it's not just a system, here's a reporting structure, but a routine, how often you do it, and you do it the same every week. That power of habit allows you to measure and recognize a heartbeat, and then recognize something that is offbeat when you're doing it. But you have to create those patterns for yourself to do the proper assessment. And it's very easy to implement a system and implement a routine. You just have to stick to it. And after a while, like anything, exercising, stop smoking, whatever this stuff is, once you start doing something for a while, you do it very well.
That's true.
All right. Well, I appreciate you, Esther. Thank you so much for
Doug was just trying to get one last question in.
Oh, sorry, Doug.
That's all right. This is one thing, I've heard that what gets measured gets managed many, many times. And I think that we're all in the creative business, and oftentimes what is measured is often invisible, because we're knowledge workers, and we're not on an assembly line, and it's very difficult to see what's going on in someone's head. So it's hard to measure, storyboards per minute, animations per hour. So, I think that there has to be some other way to think about. I tend to think about, outcomes versus output. So what are is the customer happy? Zoom out a little bit, say over the lifetime of this person's employee with you, have they produced what in XYZ in revenue or in business leads? An ROI on a salesperson is easier to measure than an ROI on a creative. And I'll go to my grave believing that.
Well,
I mean, you could measure them at pitch wins, but
well, I'll tell you this. So dovetail what Doug's saying. I had an executive tell me that he's leading up a marketing team, big company, and he's not happy with their performance. And he said, I want them to be more creative and more innovative. And I said, well, what does that mean? More creative, more innovative. And then I said, what does creativity and innovation mean? And then do you have metrics in place to actually measure that? How are you measuring creativity and how are you measuring innovation? And he's like, well, it's an amorphous thing. And I said, no, it's not. It's not an amorphous thing. I said to him, you're saying right now that you're not getting what you want. So already you have a standard that's not being met. So if you have a standard that's not being met, we already have a measurement. So I think that to your point, you're right, that there are some things that are amorphous, that there are some things, but I would say that there are ways to absolutely know whether or not things are performing in the ways that we want them to be. And I do think that things need to be contextualized, because otherwise we're all trying to run around trying to measure creativity and innovation, these big words that mean different things to every single person you ask. And unless let's say, like in this case, the executive is aligned with his team, or what are the questions we need for them to ask in order to know that they're meeting that standard, the standard is not going to magically appear. But with those kinds of tools that you create out of nothing, frankly, it's out of nothing. Yeah. That's when real movement happens.
Right. Yeah. And I think that I think that's a very great explanation and a good point. And I would say that that's about expectation setting. So the person you were speaking to, the guy who wanted more innovation, has to show, it gets back to earlier what you're talking about, alignment. What does success look like? What, as a leader's job is to look out at the horizon, and a manager's job, or an IC, an independent individual contributor, has to look down at their feet. But you have to set the vision, and then you can measure against that. And that's completely honest and appropriate. My point is that if you just are looking for presenteeism or busyness or a mouse moving or keystrokes happening, you're looking at the wrong thing. So I agree with you.
Yeah, 100%.
It doesn't mean results at all, just because the mouse is moving faster than anyone else's. Yeah, especially when you're working at trying to please a client on a creative basis, the subjective things you're doing. Esther, I'll say this again. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. I always learn something from you every time we talk. And just to be able to partner with you on this and a few other things coming up, maybe we'll tease that pretty soon, other things that we're doing. But this opportunity just to pick your brain and ask these big questions, because we are going into, say, like the winter season, as you said before, and to know that there are great opportunities if we keep our minds and our eyes open to it. So we have to think critically, understand the season, understand what our responsibility is, and start kind of working the season that we have. And we can lament that the old stuff is going away, but we can also look forward to new things that are coming. So it's good for us to keep our eyes open to that.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Tim, and thank you so much for everybody who joined today and for all your comments and conversations. We really appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And thank you all for being part of the second what Esther said. If you guys want to talk more, I'll be posting this video in community. Feel free to keep the conversation going. If you learned something, please share it with others. That's why we're here. So don't hold it back. Post it somewhere. Let people know what you've learned and take this thing forward. And until next week, we'll see you all. I appreciate you all. Love you all. And blessings to you. And thank you again, Esther. We'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye, guys.